Long before satellites, before steel, before a single modern machine ever touched the Earth, people were already building things that shouldn't have been possible. Fortresses that held off armies 10 times their size. Domes that have survived 23 centuries of earthquakes. Cliffs turned into cities. Tombs whose paint still hasn't faded. No cranes, no blueprints that survived, no written manuals explaining how any of it was done. Just the finished result, precise, durable, and centuries ahead of what history says these people were capable of. Tonight, we are traveling across 4 continents to look at 8 sites that still make modern engineers uncomfortable, because nobody can fully explain how they were built, why they've survived, or what knowledge got lost along the way. Let's begin. In present-day Nagano Prefecture, Japan, stands a castle that on paper should never have survived. Uda Castle was raised in 1583 by the warlord Sanada Masayuki, and by every conventional measure of Sengoku period warfare, it was too small to matter. Osaka Castle covered roughly a square kilometer. Himeji sprawled across multiple defensive rings. Uda was a fraction of that size. And yet, in 1585, around 2,000 defenders inside its walls held off a Tokugawa army of more than 7,000 men. 15 years later, during the lead-up to the Battle of Sekigahara, a garrison of only 2,000 to 3,000 defenders delayed nearly 38,000 Tokugawa troops. Military simulations suggest odds like that should have ended the siege in days, not weeks. The answer may lie in how the castle was actually laid out. Modern surveys show that attackers couldn't approach in a straight line at all. They were funneled through turns, elevation changes, and narrow choke points. Some researchers estimate certain approach routes cut the effective width of an attacking formation by more than 70%. And the land around the castle wasn't entirely natural either. Digital elevation surveys have identified embankments, trenches, and engineered slopes that turned ordinary terrain into a kind of artificial battlefield, without a single surviving record describing how it was built. Digital reconstructions of the castle's long-vanished towers also suggest overlapping fields of fire, a concept modern militaries formalized centuries later. If that's right, Uda may have been one of the earliest fortresses in Japan, built specifically around combined gunpowder and archery defense at the exact moment firearms were transforming the battlefield. Deep in the mountains of eastern Serbia sits a Roman imperial complex that never should have been built where it was. Romulania is linked to Emperor Galerius, one of the rulers of the Roman Tetrarchy in the early 4th century AD, and its location alone is a mystery. Roman imperial residences were normally built near major cities or military routes. This one sat in isolated, rugged terrain, and yet archaeological surveys show a fortified enclosure covering more than 3 hectares, filled with monumental structures. Thousands of tons of stone, brick, timber, and lime had to reach this remote spot. No large staging areas have been found nearby. No complete transport network has been identified. The finished palace exists, the logistics behind it largely don't. The deepest mystery, though, is underground. Archaeologists uncovered a monumental burial complex containing cremated remains alongside an extraordinary collection of gold jewelry. Necklaces, earrings, and ornaments built with wire measured in fractions of a millimeter. Even today, reproducing some of these granulation and filigree techniques requires laboratory conditions and specialist training. And the cremation itself was no simple bonfire. It required sustained temperatures above 800 degrees Celsius, controlled airflow, and a level of combustion management researchers compare to industrial process control. Historians still debate who exactly was buried there, likely a woman connected to the imperial family, but the identity and the full engineering story behind the palace remain unresolved. On the coast of Crete, above the waters of Matala Bay, a cliff face has been hollowed out into more than 60 artificial chambers, carved directly into soft sandstone, mostly during the Roman period. Some chambers sit just above sea level. Others occupy positions that would have been dangerous to reach even during construction. No ropes, ladders, or scaffolding from that era have survived to explain how workers got there. Engineers today aren't even sure which excavation method was used. Carving from the front would have required massive timber scaffolding against an exposed coastal cliff. Working from above would have demanded rope systems and a way to haul debris up and away. Every option is logistically brutal. Tool marks confirm iron implements were used throughout, but experimental archaeologists have found that removing even a few cubic meters of stone can take hundreds of labor hours. Scaled up to the entire cliff, that's an almost unthinkable investment of time. And the layout isn't random. Doorways line up, niches repeat in patterns. That implies some form of surveying, without laser levels, without instruments, and without being able to see through solid rock while you dig. Nearly 2,000 years of Mediterranean salt spray, wind, and shifting weather should have destroyed much of this. Instead, large sections remain intact, suggesting the builders understood which parts of the rock would last, long before geology was a formal science. On a limestone ridge above Okinawa's southeastern coast, the ruins of Tomagusku Castle occupy a position so precise it borders on suspicious. Built sometime between the 12th and 14th centuries, the site commands sweeping views of both inland approaches and long stretches of Pacific coastline at once. That's not an easy balance to strike. Visibility, defense, access to fresh water, and nearby farmland, all optimized in a single location. Today, that kind of siting analysis is done with satellite data and GIS software. There's no evidence the builders had anything like that. Then there's the stonework itself. Many wall sections use irregular limestone blocks fitted together with no mortar at all, held up purely by geometry, weight, and friction. One misplaced stone can destabilize an entire wall, yet these have survived centuries of typhoons. Okinawa sits inside one of the most active typhoon corridors on Earth, with winds regularly exceeding 150 kilometers an hour. Add roughly 1,500 measurable earthquakes across Japan each year, and dry stone construction should be a liability. Instead, it may be the secret. Engineers studying similar dry stone systems, from Machu Picchu to the Inca Road network, have found that unmortared stone can absorb seismic energy by shifting slightly instead of cracking outright. Whether Tomagusku's builders understood that or simply stumbled onto it through generations of trial and error is still an open question. With over 2,000 millimeters of annual rainfall, the site also needed drainage smart enough to protect the walls without ever flooding them. And somehow it worked, for centuries, with no modern hydrology involved. Hidden under a modest earthen mound in central Bulgaria is one of the largest religious complexes the Thracians ever built. Starocell dates back to the 4th century BC, possibly under the powerful Thracian king Sitalces, and at its heart sits an engineering problem that still puzzles architects today. A monumental stone dome built more than 2 centuries before Rome reached its architectural peak, using a technique called corbelling, where each ring of stone pushes slightly inward from the one below it until the opening can finally be closed at the top. It sounds simple. It isn't. Every stone in a dome like this pushes outward as well as down, and if those forces aren't balanced with precision, the whole structure collapses before it's even finished. Deviations of just a few centimeters can be catastrophic. The Thracians had no steel reinforcement, no structural calculations, and no laser measurement, yet the dome has survived more than 23 centuries of earthquakes native to this seismically active region. Surrounding the temple is a circular wall measuring roughly 240 meters across, a shape that gets exponentially harder to keep accurate as it grows larger. Even small surveying errors should have become glaringly visible over that distance. They didn't. Some researchers believe parts of the complex were deliberately aligned with solar events, echoing the same astronomical precision seen at Stonehenge and Newgrange, which would mean the builders of Starocell weren't just architects, they were watching the sky. In 1944, soldiers digging defensive trenches near the Bulgarian city of Kazanlak accidentally broke into an underground chamber that had been sealed since the late 4th or early 3rd century BC. What they found stunned archaeologists. A nearly perfectly preserved Thracian burial monument, a narrow corridor leading into a circular domed room barely 2.5 meters across, its brick dome built with striking geometric accuracy for a structure over 2,300 years old. But the real mystery isn't the architecture, it's the paint. The murals depict a Thracian nobleman and his wife at a ceremonial banquet surrounded by musicians, horses, and servants. And after more than 2 millennia underground, the colors are still visible. Most ancient murals don't survive this well. Humidity, mineral salts, and microbial growth usually destroy pigment within a few centuries. Analysis suggests the plaster beneath the paint was made from an unusually refined lime mixture, but the complete recipe has never been reconstructed. The technical skill on display is just as puzzling. Shading creates convincing 3-dimensional depth on a curved ceiling, a technique that predates famous fresco traditions, later perfected by the Romans, and much later, the Renaissance. Some researchers think the earthen mound itself acted as a natural climate buffer, keeping temperature and moisture stable for centuries, meaning the entire tomb may have functioned as an accidental preservation chamber, protecting art that modern museums still struggle to keep this vivid. In 1992, construction crews preparing to build a baseball stadium in northern Japan uncovered something far older than anyone expected, a settlement that had thrived for more than 15 centuries, roughly between 3900 and 2200 BC. That means this community existed around the same time the earliest Egyptian pyramids were being planned, built not by a farming empire, but by a society traditionally assumed to be simple hunter-gatherers. At the heart of the site, archaeologists found 6 enormous post voles, each about 2 meters wide, once holding chestnut pillars nearly a meter thick. Reconstructions suggest the finished structure stood between 15 and 20 meters tall, roughly the height of a 6-story building. And they built it with polished stone axes, no iron, no wheels, no draft animals. Experimental archaeology shows that felling a single large tree this way can take many hours, and this settlement needed dozens of them, raised and aligned with real precision. The wider settlement covered around 40 hectares, with residential areas, storage buildings, and ceremonial spaces clearly separated from each other, a level of organized planning that looks almost urban, centuries before anything resembling a city existed here. Even stranger, excavators found jade and obsidian that traveled hundreds of kilometers to get there, proof of long-distance trade networks maintained for generations, without writing, without maps, and without any record of how that knowledge was passed down. On the coast of southern Greece sits a cave with one of the longest continuous records of human occupation ever found in Europe. Nearly 30,000 years, from nearly 38,000 BC to 3000 BC. And buried inside it is evidence that may rewrite what we think prehistoric humans could do. Thousands of obsidian tools were recovered here, volcanic glass chemically traced back to the island of Milos, roughly 150 kilometers away by water. And that distance is the problem. Even during the last ice age, when sea levels were far lower, Milos remained an island cut off by open water. The obsidian at Francti appears as early as roughly 13,000 years ago, meaning people were crossing open sea out of sight of land to reach it repeatedly. No compass, no charts, no boats have survived to study. At sea level, the horizon disappears after about 5 kilometers, meaning a small error in direction could mean missing an island entirely and never finding your way back. Some researchers point to celestial navigation, similar to what Polynesian sailors would later use across the Pacific, reading stars, sun position, and wave patterns instead of instruments. Whatever the method, it had to be reliable enough to teach generation after generation with no writing at all. Excavators even found evidence that these same people were catching large open water fish like tuna, animals that require real knowledge of migration and timing to hunt successfully. It suggests a level of accumulated, transmitted knowledge about the sea that simply isn't supposed to exist this early in human history. A fortress engineered to defeat armies 10 times its size, a palace built in the middle of nowhere with jewelry no modern goldsmith can easily replicate, a cliff turned into a city, a castle that laughs at typhoons, a stone dome older than Rome that's still standing, a tomb whose paint refuses to fade, a village that predates the pyramids, and sailors who crossed open ocean before anyone was supposed to be capable of it. Different continents, different centuries, completely different cultures, and yet the same pattern keeps showing up. Extraordinary engineering, almost no written explanation of how it was done. In each case, the evidence survived, the instructions didn't. And that raises the real question behind everything we just covered. How much ancient knowledge has simply vanished, not because it wasn't real, but because nobody ever wrote it down? So, here's the question for you. Out of everything in this video, the fortress, the palace, the cliff caves, the dome, the tomb, the village, or the sailors, which mystery do you most want archaeologists to finally solve? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll pin the best theories. And if lost engineering and unsolved ancient history is your thing, subscribe and turn on notifications because we're only scratching the surface of what's still buried out there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.